Yes, thank you. So I want to look at another passage in Mr. Crawford's witness statement. That's at SEA 000-14275 at page 17. No, that's not the right document. So it's SEA 000-14275 at page 17. Yes, and I want to look at paragraph 41. Can we zoom in on the top half of that? So this is Mr. Crawford saying, while I understood Studio was appointed to carry out various services post-contract, a key concern for me through the construction phase was to maintain the integrity of the architectural intent established at planning and tender stages. This did not necessarily involve commenting on the finer detail or technical aspects of designs or the selection of materials, but was from the view of architectural intent, which covered aspects such as siting, spatial arrangements, amenity tolerances, dimensional coordination, the appearance, proportions, colours or finishes of the products. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, do you agree with Mr. Crawford's description of Studio E's role here post-novation?
If I had read that as I am now in isolation, I would have said that would apply to a specialist item, the cladding, which I'm not sure it is applying because I'm not as familiar, or I'm not familiar with Neil's statement.
I see. So what you're saying is commenting on the finer detail or the technical aspects of the design or the selection of materials wouldn't have occurred in relation to the cladding. Is that what you're saying?
I think if requested on an architectural aspect, doors, for instance, where there wasn't a specialist involved, we would get involved in the finer detail, but not on a specialist package.
So is it as simple as that? If there's a specialist subcontractor involved in a package...
I'm not sure of the context of this comment, so...
Well, this is about what Studio E's services were post-contract, so it's consistent with the topic we've been discussing earlier. He uses the word architectural intent. Is that a phrase that you're familiar with?
Yes.
And what do you take it to mean? Do you take it to mean the same as what he's saying here?
Broadly, yes. Yes.
Did you ever advise Ryden in terms that you were only commenting on architectural intent?
I don't recall discussing or advising Ryden on that. I think that is quite typical of a markup process.
But again, how is that consistent with the deed of appointment that we looked at this morning, which Ryden signed in 2016? Sorry, which Studio E signed in 2016?
My understanding is the obligation for the detailed design falls to the specialist, unless it's an architectural element which the architect is responding or responsible for.
How is it consistent with item 8 of that schedule? Seek to ensure that all designs comply with relevant statutory requirements.
You asked me earlier what I understood by seek, and I said I think it would be interpreted in that context as liaison with building control. So
I see. So you read that, seek to ensure that all designs comply with the relevant statutory requirements as synonymous with coordinate with building control and pass on any comments.
Liaison, coordinate.
With building control. But that was dealt with separately, wasn't it, in the schedule of services, building control, coordination. This is a separate item.
There's two clauses, one after the other.
Yeah, they were separate clauses. Can we go to paragraph 42 of Mr. Crawford's statement? So just down there, and he says in the second sentence, I did not consider that the review of drawings of others during the project was to double check that they were technically correct or necessarily compliant with building regulations above and beyond their consistency with the architectural intent. So just taking that in stages, is it your evidence that you understood Studio E's role did not involve checking that the drawings were technically correct or compliant with the building regulations?
Those are very broad terms. I did say earlier that we were not engaged to confirm compliance on anything. I felt, and technically correct, of course, could apply to anything within the package.
And when you say you were not engaged to confirm compliance, I felt.
That was
why? What had led you to be of that belief?
what had led us. So
Yeah, why did you think you weren't engaged to be checking compliance with the building regulations? What was it?
because it's I would argue beyond most architects to do that.
So it's not the job of an architect to check whether the drawings are technically correct and compliant with the building regulations?
The building regulations are distinct from the approved documents, which is
I'm not talking about the approved documents, I'm just talking about the building regulations.
Oh.
Is it the role, as you understand it, of an architect to check that the drawings are compliant with the building regulations?
no, I don't think it is.
And you didn't believe it was your role on the Grenfell project?
No.
And looking what he's saying there, he's used the word above and beyond their consistency with the architectural intent. Again, the way he's used architectural intent, do you agree with that all you're checking for is architectural intent?
That is, again, under a design and build specialist contract, that is what I would expect the architect to be looking at, yes.
So am I right in that this was an assumption you made from the fact that there was a design and build contractor, that your role would be limited to checking for architectural intent, which is effectively kind of aesthetics?
I think you would comment on what you see, and that is usually comparing it to the original architectural intent and seeking to ensure that the contractor is achieving it.
By architectural intent, do you mean anything other than aesthetics?
In this context, I don't think it did, no.
And who did you think was responsible for checking compliance with the building regulations during the ride-in phase of the project?
From the applicant's side?
Who else? If it wasn't you checking, who should have been checking?
Building control, as I understood at the time, were primarily responsible for confirming compliance.
I see. So do you think it's building control's role to look at all the drawings on a project and check that they all comply with building regulations?
That's not usually what they do, but they usually will ask questions to satisfy themselves that the works are in accordance with either the guidance or an alternative means of demonstrating compliance.
So does that mean that on this project you were totally reliant on building control flagging any concerns about compliance with the building regulations?
We weren't the applicant. So I don't feel we were relying on anybody. You're asking me if we were relying. I don't think we were the applicant.
But does this mean on the project that you thought the only people who were looking out for building control compliance, for building regulation compliance, was building control?
I think there's a statutory duty on behalf of the applicant. I think it starts with the client, and I think he devolves it on to the contractor.
It's the person carrying out the works, isn't it? Under the
Yes,
Building Act,
under building
1984.
contracts, yeah.
But you didn't think it was any part of your role to be checking that?
No.
Just to finish off on the contract documents, there was a collateral warranty that was signed in favour of the TMO. Can we just look at that? That's TMO 20835-763. So this was a consultant deed of collateral warranty. This was signed at the same time as the Studio E Limited deed with Ryden. And then if we go on page 4, under item 3, do you see there, 3.1, it says, the consultant warrants and undertakes that it has performed and shall continue to perform all of its duties and obligations under or arising out of the appointment. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then at 3.2, it says it has exercised and will continue to exercise in the performance of the services the reasonable skill and care to be expected of a properly qualified and competent structural engineer experienced in the provision of services and works for projects of a similar size, scope, value, character and complexity to the project. Can you explain why that clause refers to a structural engineer there as opposed to an architect?
We didn't prepare the document, and I can't explain it.
But this is a deed. This is an important document, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's signed by Studio E. Would there be a process within Studio E for checking these kind of deeds before they were signed, to check for points like that?
The first point of call, of course, was referring it to the insurer. I would have read it. My director, Andre, would have read it. But clearly that was missed.
Okay. I now want to come to a different topic, which is to look at some statutory requirements. So we looked this morning at Studio E LLP's appointment to the TMO, and we looked under stage D that there was reference to investigating the effect of statutory standards. Do you remember that? Under stage D. And construction safety on concept design. Do you want to look at that again?
Yeah.
Yep. It's SEA 409824 on page 9. So there, this is under REBA stage D at the top of the page, second line down, investigating effective statutory standards and construction safety on concept design. And I think you agreed with me this morning that at least stage D, I think we actually referred to stages C and D, Studio E was required to consider compliance with statutory standards. Do you agree?
Yes.
And that would include the building regulations?
Yes.
And would you agree that this ought to be done at the earliest opportunity in the design process to investigate the effect of statutory standards?
Yes.
And it ought to comprise an evaluation of all applicable building regulations and associated relevant guidance that will affect the question of compliance. Do you agree?
That's a bit more difficult to agree.
Well, I'll read it back to you again. It ought to comprise an evaluation of all applicable building regulations and associated relevant guidance that will affect the question of compliance. What is it you don't agree with there?
it's suggesting you would try and investigate the impacts of any standards without having a design to compare it to, or to use as a study.
Well, it's suggesting that knowing the type of project that you're involved in may be sensible to investigate the parameters, the statutory parameters within which you're working. Do you agree with that?
That's broader, yes. I think it has to be broad before you start looking into detail.
But here, for example, we have a high-rise building over 18 metres. So would you agree that it would be sensible to investigate the standards that would apply to a high-rise building, the statutory standards and any relevant guidance?
Yes.
And do you agree that it would be best practice to reduce that research into a series of memos or in diagrammatic form with notes? Have you seen that before, where someone's provided a note that summarises the statutory standards and any relevant statutory guidance?
No, I haven't come across that before.
And you haven't come across that at all within your work in Studio E?
No one I've worked with has proposed that or undertaken that, to my knowledge.
So can you explain how at Studio E you would learn about the relevant statutory standards and guidance? If you're not producing that kind of research note for the team, how would you gain that knowledge and how would that be communicated?
By statutory standards, are you focusing on building control?
Building regulations,
Regulation.
and associated guidance. So I guess the approved documents being particularly important.
Yeah. Those documents obviously break down the requirements into different categories, which tend to fall to individual consultants. At the outset of a project, all those consultants would bring their experience to bear on the initial proposals, and so would the architect, of course. So I would say, in a sense, you bring with you what you've learnt on previous projects to begin with.
But if this is a new project, and we know this was a new project for Studio E, wouldn't it be good practice to do some detailed research on the statutory standards early in the design process?
I think you're... I'm still not sure. You haven't said fire, but I think you mean fire.
It could be fire, it could be other key building regulation requirements, it could be approved document L, it could be approved document B. Would you agree with a new project, it was particularly important to make sure the statutory standards were understood?
It was a refurbishment project, so the standards we understood would be complex and require some detailed consideration from each consultant.
So did that mean that you were going to be beholden to what those consultants told you about the statutory standards, and you didn't...
Not beholden, but if you take Part L, it clearly was an interpretation to follow through the guidance to show compliance, which in this instance I believe Max Fordham would have undertaken.
I see. So you relied on Max Fordham to interpret Part L and approved document L and
largely, yeah.
Communicate that to you. Does that mean you wouldn't read approved document L yourself?
At stage D, probably not.
Okay.
I have read parts of Part L, and I probably might have read them on this project, but it's not, the guidance isn't, it's usually referred to as required.
I see. There is no documented statutory compliance review relating to Grenfell Tower, is there, that was produced by Studio E itself?
No.
But do you agree that producing a basic design scheme which was compliant with statutory requirements should have been on hand for Studio E against which to check the design of Harley as the design work developed?
I'm not aware we've done that or that it's required in any document.
How else would Studio E satisfy itself that Harley's designs complied with the statutory requirements? Or is it your evidence that, as per before, you wouldn't be checking Harley's work for statutory compliance?
Correct, yeah.
Can we go on now?
You mean you did not expect to check Harley's work? Is that what you're saying?
For compliance.
For compliance? Yeah, right.
Okay. I want to ask you some more detailed questions about the building regulations in approved document B. We're going to come back to some points of detail later when we look at some different elements of the facade. At the outset of your work on the Grenfell Tower refurbishment, were you aware of the requirements of Schedule 1, Part B, fire safety of the Building Regulations 2010?
I think you asked me that yesterday. I think I said yes. Yeah.
Did you take any specific steps to familiarise yourself with the requirements of Schedule 1, Part B, fire safety at any stage during the Grenfell Tower project?
I can't recall doing so, no.
Do you agree that Schedule 1, Part B of the Building Regulations is of key importance when embarking on a project to overclad an existing high-rise residential building?
So is a key?
A key of key importance. Do you agree that Schedule 1, Part B of the Building Regulations is of key importance when embarking on a project to overclad an existing high-rise residential building?
I'm not sure what is going to flow from that. Can you explain?
Well, would it be fair to say that meeting the requirements of Schedule 1, Part B on fire safety is one of the most important aspects of any design of a high-rise building?
Yes.
And do you agree that fire safety is fundamental to the work of an architect's practice?
Yes.
And that any competent architect would have at least an awareness of the existence and importance of the fire-related provisions in the building regulations and approved documents?
I believe most architects would be aware of them, yes.
Yeah. Can we look at approved document B now? So can we turn to that? That's CLG 50173. Now, this is the 2006 edition with 2010 amendments. So this is what would have been available in 2012 when Studio E were first working on the Grenfell Tower project. At the outset of your work on the project, were you aware of the statutory guidance in approved document B on fire safety?
In a general sense, yes.
What does that mean in a general
Well,
sense?
you've asked me if I was aware, which you could...
So you aware that there was something called approved document
Yes,
B?
yes.
Yeah.
I thought you might mean that I knew it inside out. I did not.
No. Were you aware of its existence?
Yes.
What was your understanding of the purpose of approved document B? What was it there to do?
It's guidance. It's a guidance document.
It's statutory practical guidance. Would that be consistent with your understanding?
Yeah, yeah.
And at the outset of the refurbishment, what steps did you take to familiarise yourself with the guidance in approved document B?
At the outset, we knew that it would not be possible to form an opinion on compliance of the provisions without a consultant. So, although we, as a team and myself, have certainly worked with the approved documents in the past, I did not expect to be able to use them necessarily on Grenfell.
Did you actually read approved document B at the time of the Grenfell project?
I referred to it on occasion, but I certainly didn't read it from start to finish, no.
When you say I referred to it on occasion, what do you
Yeah.
mean by that?
Well, usually because it's so wide-ranging, you find yourself, or an architect will find themselves referring to specific sections to try and understand whether they are meeting the requirements.
Okay. Can we turn to page 69 within this document where we see regulation, where we see B3 of Schedule 1 set out on internal fire spread structure? Do you see that? So it says B3.1, the building shall be designed and constructed so that in the event of fire, its stability will be maintained. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then at 3, where reasonably necessary to inhibit the spread of fire within the building, measures shall be taken to an extent appropriate to the size and intended use of the building, comprising either or both of the following. And then we've got subdivision of the building with fire-resisting construction, installation of suitable automatic fire suppression systems. And then at B3.4 at the bottom, the building shall be designed and constructed so that the unseen spread of fire and smoke within concealed spaces in its structure and fabric is inhibited. Were you familiar with these parts of B3 at the time of the Grenfell project?
Yes, I was. These had all come up on previous projects.
And did you read this section of the approved document during your time on the Grenfell project, the B3 section?
No.
Can we then turn to B4 at page 93? This sets out the requirements in Schedule 1 of the building regulations in terms of external fire spread. And at B4.1, the external walls of the building shall adequately resist the spread of fire over the walls and from one building to another, having regard to the height, use and position of the building. You see that there?
Yes.
Were you familiar with this at the time of the Grenfell project?
Partially, I was, yes. Certainly the protecting one building from another, and the roof resist the spread of fire across the roof. I was aware of that.
I see. So you're aware of those two aspects.
And the adequately resisting the spread of fire, I think, was, I guess, more self-evident to me rather than being aware that it was stated explicitly.
Did you read this B4 section of approved document B during your time on the Grenfell project?
No.
Can we just look within this document at page 95? And I want to look in the bottom right-hand corner at 12.5. So there we have the external envelope of a building should not provide a medium for fire spread if it is likely to be a risk to health or safety. The use of combustible materials in the cladding system and extensive cavities may present such a risk in tall buildings. And then it goes on, external walls should either meet the guidance given in paragraphs 12.6 to 12.9 or meet the performance criteria given in the BRE report, fire performance of external thermal insulation for walls of multi-storey buildings, BR 135, for cladding systems using full-scale test data from BS 8414. So we see those two paragraphs there. Did you understand at the time of the Grenfell project that approved document B contains these two potential routes to compliance with the functional requirement of part B4.1 of the building regulations?
No, I wasn't.
Are you able to confirm which of these routes was actually followed on Grenfell Tower?
No.
And then if we go to 12.6, at the bottom of that page and on to the next page, the external surfaces of the walls should meet the provisions in diagram 40. We see that there. Can we go to diagram 40? This is on page 97. Did you ever look at this diagram at any time during your work on the Grenfell Tower refurbishment?
I'm not sure. I'm familiar with it, but I'm afraid I can't be sure that I did.
Did you know that it was the diagram E in the bottom right-hand corner which would have applied to Grenfell Tower? Did you know that at the time?
No.
And just looking at that for a moment, we can see there's various shading on the building, and we can see from the arrows on the right-hand side that any dimension over 18 metres is in the dark grey shading. And if we go to the key on the right-hand side, it says there, Class 0, National Class, or Class B, S3, D2, or better. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Did you know what these classifications meant at the time of the Grenfell Tower project?
I certainly had come across the Class O class in the past.
How had you come across that before?
It had been required for, I think it comes up quite often for finishes internally as a requirement, particularly in a public building.
And what did you know about Class 0? What did that mean to you? What was your understanding of what it meant?
It was resistance of spread of flame across the surface.
You knew that much?
Yeah.
Did you know about the specific tests that had to be undertaken to get Class 0?
No.
And what about reference there to Class B, S3, D2? What did you know about that?
I'm not familiar. I was not familiar with the B class.
Were you familiar with any of the European classifications? So had you heard of A1, A2,
I had not, no.
B?
No, I don't
No.
think I had.
Okay. Can we then go to paragraph 12.7 on page 96? And we have a paragraph there headed Insulation Materials / Products. And it says, in a building with a story 18 metres or more above ground level, any insulation product, filler material, not including gaskets, sealants and similar, etc., used in the external wall construction should be of limited combustibility. Do you see that?
Yes.
Were you aware of that guidance at the time of your work on the Grenfell Tower project?
No, I was not.
Had you heard of the phrase limited combustibility?
I don't recall hearing of it, no.
Were you aware that there might be different rules that applied to buildings over 18 metres, or different guidance which made certain recommendations about buildings over 18 metres? Were you aware of that at the time of your work on the Grenfell project?
No, I was aware that they may exist, yes. But I myself did not refer to Part B at the time.
So just to be specific, were you aware that buildings over 18 metres had different guidance associated with them?
The 18 metres, I can't recall if that I was aware of that.
So it follows that you didn't apply your mind at the time of the Grenfell project to how this clause applied to the materials that you were selecting.
As I wasn't myself preparing the documents, I do not know.
Well, we'll come back to what you did and didn't prepare a little bit later. Finally, can we just look at paragraph 12.8 on this page at 96? And it says, cavity barriers should be provided in accordance with section 9. Do you see that?
Yes?
Did you understand at the time of your work on the Grenfell Tower project that cavity barriers were required in external walls?
Yes. Yes. Well,
Did you understand that they were required to limit fire spread within the cavity?
yes.
And did you also understand they were required to limit the fire spread from a compartment into the cavity?
No.
Did you ever read section 9 on cavity barriers, section 9 of approved document B, during your time on the Grenfell Tower project?
Sorry, did I ever read section 9?
Yeah, during your time on the Grenfell project, section 9 on cavity barriers.
I do not know.
And
Well, I cannot recall doing so. I'll repeat, I wasn't necessarily, in most cases, I was not preparing the drawings or the specifications at the time, when you might.
okay. And had you heard of, I mean, just going back to page 95 and paragraph 12.5, had you heard of BS 8414 testing?
No.
Did you know what that meant?
No, I did not.
What about BR 135 that's there? That's the report, the BRE report, Fire Performance of External Thermal Insulation for Walls, BR 135. Were you aware of that guidance at the time of the Grenfell project?
No, I wasn't.
Now, if we look at paragraph 240 of your witness statement, this is at SEA 000014273 at page 105. So there you are referring to an email from Mr. Ashton of Curtains. Yeah. So you say at the beginning of that, I also note that on the 1st of November 2013, Curtains, they were the structural engineers on the project, weren't they?
Yes.
Curtains emailed Artelia attaching structural specifications, presumably to be included as part of the employer's requirements. One of the documents was titled Structural Performance Specification for the Design, Supply and Application of Overcladding Systems to Grenfell Tower. On reading this document in preparation of this witness statement, paragraph 7.1.13 states, the system should comply fully with the recommendations of the BRE document. And then we have the title, second edition, 2003. So that document was referred to in the Curtains specification. Did you ever read it during your time on the Grenfell project?
No, that paragraph wasn't brought to my attention. That arrived 1st of November.
Can we look at BR 135, the second edition? So it's at BRE 405554. And if we can go on page 2, we'll see the front page. There we go. So we can see it there, fire performance, external wall, thermal insulation, second edition at the bottom. So I think you've confirmed that you didn't read this document at the time. I just want to look at a couple of passages in here. On page 7, can we go to page 7? There's reference there and a picture of the Garnet Court fire in Irvine in Scotland that was in the summer of 1999. Can you see that there?
Yes.
Were you aware of that Garnet Court fire at the time of your work on the Grenfell project?
No, I wasn't.
No. Can we go to page 9 within this document? And we get pictorial representation of rapid fire spread. Can you see that there? And you see if the external cladding contributes to the flame spread, there's a risk of secondary fire spread to all levels. Do you see that?
Yes.
Fires breaking out the bottom and breaking back in. Had you ever seen a diagram like this or during your time at the Grenfell project?
No, I had not.
Were you aware of these mechanisms, this rapid fire spread, frames breaking back out and back in and up the external cladding? Was that something you had an awareness of when you were working on the Grenfell Tower project?
Sorry, the rapid fire spread? No, I had no knowledge of this.
And on page 10, paragraph 3, under the heading cavities, can we see, if we look there together, it says cavities may be incorporated with an external cladding system or may be formed by the delamination of differential movement. And then this sentence, if flames become confined or restricted by entering cavities within the external cladding system, they will become elongated as they seek oxygen and fuel to support the combustion process. This process can lead to flame extension of 5 to 10 times that of the original flame lengths, regardless of the materials used to line the cavities. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Now, is that something that you were more generally aware of at the time of your work on the Grenfell project?
Well, I think that would fall within fire spread within cavities. So yes, I think I was more aware of that.
Okay. Can we look at page 17 under the heading Performance of Materials in Fire Insulation? So it's towards the bottom of the page. There's a heading. There we go. Yeah. Performance of Materials in Fire Insulation. So it says there, the performance of insulating material when subjected to this type of fire scenario has been outlined in the previous section. Typically, non-combustible materials are used in these systems as it's difficult to prevent fire entering the cavity and spreading through the insulating material. Is that something that you were aware of at the time of your work on the Grenfell project? That typically non-combustible materials are used in these systems because of the difficulty preventing the fire entering the cavity and then spreading?
No.
And then right at the bottom, under the heading External Panel, and then there's a subheading there, Non-combustible Materials and Materials of Limited Combustibility. Can we just go over the next page and just read that? Do you see the last two sentences of that? It says, metal panels such as aluminium may fall from the system if the strength of the fixings is affected by the local fire source. They may also melt, generating molten metal debris if exposed directly to the sustained flame envelope. Do you see that?
Yes.
Again, were you aware of that potential for aluminium metal panels during your time on the Grenfell project?
I'm aware that aluminium has a lower melting temperature than steel, so it would fail first. I knew that.
But were you aware specifically of issues surrounding aluminium panels and their propensity to melt, generating molten metal debris?
No, I thought the melting temperature was quite high.
So that was the second edition of BR 135. The third edition of BR 135 came out in 2013, and it contained some further warnings. I just want to turn up the front page of that. That's CEL 403364. Now, were you aware of this document? I think it follows from your earlier answers that you weren't aware of any edition of BR 135. Is that right?
I was not, no.
No. Now, this contains some further warnings it talks about the increase in the volume of combustible materials being used in external cladding applications, driven by the need for energy efficiency in buildings. Were you generally aware of that trend at the time of your work on the Grenfell project, i.e. the use of combustible materials driven by this energy efficiency push?
I was not aware they were combustible.
And this
or
guidance,
risk. No,
No.
I was not aware that they were a combustible risk.
this guidance also draws close attention to the use of cavity barriers within external wall systems. Were you aware of the importance of cavity barriers in external wall systems?
Yes.
Can I ask you now a bit more about your knowledge of other cladding fires? At the time of working on the Grenfell project, were you aware that there'd been previous fires involving external cladding facades on high-rise residential buildings?
I was not, no.
So you weren't aware of any at all?
I cannot recollect anything that
Had you heard?
predates Grenfell.
Okay. Had you heard of the fire at Lacanal House in Southwark in 2009?
Well, I had heard of it, yes, and that's mentioned in my inquiry. But
Did you know that that related to, well, part of it involved external cladding panels?
No.
And external flame spread? What about a spate of fires in the United Arab Emirates, and in particular in Dubai, in between 2012, 2013, also 2015? Had you heard of any Dubai cladding fires?
I don't recall hearing of them. Not at the time.
I now want to come to ask you some questions about the selection and specification of materials. And I'm going to ask you some general questions about how Studio E went about specifying the materials which comprise the overcladding system at Grenfell Tower. Later in my questioning, I'm going to look very specifically at the insulation material that was chosen and the ACM panels. Okay, so we're going to come back to that, but I'm wanting to look at your overall approach, which Studio E took to the specification, particularly in the NBS specification, which was part of the tender documents. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So is it right that Studio E prepared the NBS specification for Grenfell Tower from August through to November 2013?
I recall that we had started work long before that on the specification.
Yeah. Yeah.
Possibly the beginning of the year or even sooner, but certainly towards the beginning of the year.
Is it right that NBS stands for National Building Specification?
I think so.
And were you personally responsible for compiling the NBS specification on the Grenfell project?
No.
Who was within Studio E?
As I say, I believe that we started earlier in 2013 because I believe Adrian Jess started work on it.
So what was your role in relation to the NBS specification?
One person prepared it, but I was usually consulted and agreed the content.
So does that mean you read the content and checked you were happy with it before it formed part of the tender documents for Ryden?
Well, that obviously came later, but usually the individual preparing it would go through each clause, complete them, and we would have a conversation about what was going in. I mean,
yeah. So I'm just checking it's fair enough for me to ask you questions about its content.
Yes.
Yes. And was Thomas Reck involved in the putting together the NBS specification?
He was, yes.
So was it Adrian Jess and Thomas Reck who worked on it?
My recollection, primarily those two, yes.
And I think what you're saying is they would do the initial work on it and then they would potentially discuss all of the clauses with you or just some of them?
Just some. I think I trusted them both equally to be able to complete a specification.
Okay. And would you agree with me that on a project like this, the employer's requirements are key, setting out for the main contractor what the core requirements of the project are?
Yes.
I think you say at paragraph 236 of your statement that the MBS is a core part of the employer's requirements.
Yes.
Do you agree with that? And would you agree that it's on the basis of the content of this specification that a tendering company can undertake an assessment of how much it will cost to undertake the project and ultimately whether it will put in a bid?
It's yes. I'm not sure why you added the last bit, but it's
Flourish. Before we consider the NBS in any detail, can you explain what a specification for a project like this is? What information does it typically contain?
a specification is broken down into sections. I think I provide a description in my.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. I'm just interested in you explaining how you understand a specification to work and what it is.
It's a written description of.
Exactly, it's a written description, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Not drawings usually. No. And where does a specification sit in the suite of documents that an architect will prepare on a project like this? Where does it sit in those documents that will be prepared? In terms of its importance.
Typically, I think my recollection is most building contracts stipulate that the specification takes precedence over drawings.
Can we go to paragraph 236 of your witness statement? This is at SEA 000-14273 at page 103. So there you've explained what a specification is, and you've explained what the NBS is. And you've explained that the MBS, which is a product produced by an entity owned by REBA, began as a standard template for the specification of workmanship, products and design, and has been developed into a full digital authoring application. It's widely used by architects to prepare construction documentation in the UK. It's broken down into sections that align approximately with the trades one typically finds on site. And then further down, you say it's a core part of the employer's requirements, and the tenderers then use it to come up with their proposals. So in practice, is it right that you use the NBS software as like a technology platform or a toolkit which helped you prepare a specification for the works?
Yes.
Now, I want to explore the different types of specification which can be put together for a project like Grenfell. Do you agree that you have three basic options when you're choosing each package or each item of each package? There could be a performance specification, there could be a prescriptive specification, and a proprietary specification. Are you familiar with those three things?
No.
Let's have a look. There's some useful REBA guidance in a REBA CPD note dated the 17th of August 2017. Can we go to that? That's at INQ 11326. So this is a publication, a CPD publication produced by REBA. It tells us, if we go on to page 2, it has a section, what is a specification? And it gives a definition. We don't need to go through all of that, but it says in there that it's a written description, the main purpose of which is to define the materials and the products to be used. Do you agree with that?
Materials and products, and there's more to it than that, but yes.
Okay. And then on page 4, we can see there's three principal types of specification outlined there. If we could blow that up. So it says there are three principal types of specification that designers can use, either singly or in a combined manner, depending on the type of project, contract or procurement method. And then they say they're performance, prescriptive and proprietary. Had you heard of these three different types of specification?
No, I've I've heard
before
of
today?
performance or prescriptive, but not proprietary.
Okay. So just taking them each in stages, a performance specification is one in which you specify a desired performance outcome in respect of any part of the refurbishment. Do you agree?
I do, yeah.
So it could have required, for example, the cladding system to achieve a certain fire performance. Do you agree with that?
I don't think I have ever done a strictly performance-based specification.
Okay.
So I
We'll
appreciate that.
We'll look in a
distinct-
moment at the MBS that you did. Can you see there it gives an example 2 lines up under that paragraph performance specification. It says, e.g., external fire performance of roofing to BSEN 13501. Now that's the European classification standard. So do you see there it's saying you could give a classification, a fire performance classification as part of a performance spec? Do you see that?
Yes.
And do you agree that that form of specification would give the main contractor and or their subcontractors a large amount of discretion and flexibility as to the type of products and ultimately actual materials to be used to achieve that outcome?
Yes.
So then here it says as an alternate route, we've got the prescriptive specification. And there it's defined here as something which would set out the full details of the product type, material and workmanship, but would not actually specify the product itself.
Sorry,
And-
the prescriptive would not actually.
So it's quite helpful to look at the little box at the bottom. Do you see they've got examples of the 3 types? So performance, we've got a door set that is to a particular a particular standard. Sorry, that's BSEN 14351, fire integrity 30 minutes. A prescriptive would be to say it's got to be clay brick, type HD, and it's got to be this size, but it falls short of actually saying what product it's got to be. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And then finally, it talks about a proprietary specification, which actually names the specific product. So here we get example of a wash basin. If you want a particular wash basin to be used in your project, you say manufacturer, Armitage Shanks, product reference, Sandringham 21. So you've told the tenderer, this is the product that we want you to use. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And do you agree that that latter type of specification is much more narrowly defined because it doesn't give the tenderer much flexibility? It's that product that you want. Do you agree that?
I think I want to say I haven't seen this before, and I'm not, as I said, we've never done a purely performance-based specification because it's extremely difficult, as I recall, and I don't agree that you wouldn't include performance requirements under a prescriptive specification with proprietary products. So
I think to be
I'm not
fair to you, it's
sure.
not.
Let him finish. Yes, finish.
On first sight, this is an artificial separation of types.
Yes. I think to be fair to you, it does state that these can be used singly or in a combined manner.
Oh, I didn't see that.
And this is emphasised at the end of that page. So do you see the line immediately above the box? It says, in many cases, a project specification will include a mixture of performance, prescriptive and proprietary information. Do you see that there?
I'd argue each section could include a
Yeah.
mix, yeah.
Yeah, understood. But do you agree that it's the architect's role, taking into account the client's requirements, to decide what type of specification to have and how prescriptive it is for each aspect of the project?
It's largely the architect's role. That's not to say the client wouldn't have a view at all.
Can we look now at the MBS specification for the Grenfell project? We're going to come back to this a number of times. We can find the final version of that at SEA 50169. And And we can see the date on the first page. It's there in red. It's the 30th of January 2014. And then it says there, L20 doors revised. So is it right that this was the last version of the NBS spec that was prepared for the Grenfell project?
Yes, I think it was.
And then can we go to section H92, which is the rain screen cladding section, which starts at page 63? And if we go within that to page 65, if we look at the top half of that page, we can see there under clause 120 that you've named a specific product in that section to be used, either Proteus HR honeycomb panel manufactured by KME Architectural Solutions. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And if we can go to page 73 and look at item 776 at the top of the page, we see there under, so this is the thermal insulation section within H92. We can see there that the thermal insulation is Celotex FR5000. Do you see that?
Yes.
So would you agree that if we are following the threefold distinction, these particular clauses are following the proprietary route? They're putting particular products in that the tenderer is being asked to use?
I agree they do include proprietary references, but I think there are standards covered elsewhere.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. So let's go back to page 64 on the top of the page. So we can see at the top of the page in the second bullet, it says the manufacturers noted within this specification are indicative and may be substituted with similar or equal alternatives. Do you see that?
Yes.
And we can see from the bottom of that same page that tenderers were also asked to submit comparative supply and install costs for 3 alternative materials. If we can just pull that up. Sorry, we need to go right to the bottom of that page. Yes. So there under clause 11, it says, in addition to the cladding specified in clauses below, that was 120 that we looked at, submit comparative supply and install costs per metre squared of the whole cladding system for the following alternative materials. And then we have Rainabond, Duragloss, 5,000, Alucobond, zinc, quartz zinc. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Do you agree that that's the wording there says submit comparative supply and install costs? Do you see that?
Yes.
So do you agree it's not actually saying you have a discretion to use alternatives, it's just wanting comparative supply and install costs?
That was the intent yes.
But looking at all of that, do you agree that you primarily adopted a proprietary specification by naming specific products, i.e. the Proteus honeycomb and the FR5000 Celotex product?
I'm sorry, did I?
Do you agree that the primary clauses here were telling you that there were particular products Studio E wanted to be used?
Yes.
And did you do that? Can you explain why you did that? Was that for essentially aesthetic reasons, because you wanted a particular aesthetic finish that you were looking for?
The rain screen?
Yeah.
Well, the specification of the rain screen obviously took a long time to arrive at, and there was a lot of research undertaken. I don't think it was just aesthetic, or if it would just, but it's obviously covered in great length in my statement, but the proposal to use zinc came very early, and we kept with it, and and proposed what we thought we did research it with the supplier.
Yeah, we will come to
Yeah.
all of that.
So that was our preferred solution or
Yeah.
specification, so that's why we put it first.
Now, as we've seen, you gave some latitude to the contractor because you talked about similar or equal products. That
Yeah.
was the top of page 64 we were just looking at that. And I
Yeah.
think in the contract preliminaries, I don't think we need to go to this. It makes clear that if alternative products are to be proposed, one of the things that has to happen is the contractor has to provide reasons for the substitution. Do you recall that?
The preliminaries, the section A2, that's prepared by Artelia. I'm less familiar with that.
Okay. Do you accept that if you'd wanted greater input from the design and build contractor in terms of performance, including fire safety performance, you would have drafted a performance specification which would have expressly included requiring fire safety to be addressed?
Sorry, why would we?
It's really, if you'd wanted greater flexibility and input from the design and build contractor, do you agree that you would have adopted instead a performance specification rather than a proprietary one?
Yes.
Now, in fairness to you, it is relevant to point out that at paragraphs 310 and 342 of the MBS specification, if we can go to page 69 of this document. So if we look at 310 and 342, you've got there some design stroke performance requirements, and there's reference there to this CWTC standard for systemised building envelopes, which had as part of it Part 6 fire performance. Do you see that?
Yes.
We're going to look at that in some detail later. First of all, did you read that performance specification at the time of
No.
working on the Grenfell project?
No.
Can you recall whether this was a clause which was suggested to you as part of the NBS specification?
Suggested, I think it is a clause that is standard, yes.
So that's what we think. Can I take you to something? This is INQ 000111339. So this is an extract from the MBS software. So what's happened is the MBS have provided the inquiry with its original software from 2013. And this would have been the software that was available as at November 2013. Can you recall whether you would usually update the NBS software with all the relevant NBS updates? Was that Studio E's practice?
I think it was automatic. I think we had to, yes.
I see, yeah. And so looking at this screenshot, this is a screenshot taken from that NBS software. This is a standard NBS clause that can be inserted into the H92 section. Do you see that?
Yes.
And there's another screenshot. If we look at INQ 000111365, here we see another standard clause that's inserted into the NBS software. Do you see that?
Yes.
And it would appear that Studio E took that and included it as part of its package in the NBS spec. Do you agree?
Yes.
Now, there was some later guidance from the CWCT that was entitled Fire Performance of Curtain Walls and Rain Screens, Technical Note 73 of March 2011. Did you read that guidance at the time of working on the Grenfell project?
I do not recall seeing that, and I'm not. Would that have been on the platform?
It doesn't appear to have been on the platform when you wrote the MBS specification. They're referring to this other CWCT standard, which is from September 2008. But I wanted to know whether you were aware of other CWCT guidance.
No, I was not.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to finish this topic, if that's okay, and then have a break.
Yeah, that's right.
I've only got another few pages. Can we just look at your witness statement at paragraph 3.3.1, 343.1? This is a SEA 000-14273 at page 140. So looking at 343.1, you say the specialist cladding subcontractor would hold responsibility for all aspects of their system, and the successful contractor had the discretion to suggest alternative products and materials. Do you agree that that's not entirely accurate, given what we've just looked at, because the discretion of the contractor was only to suggest similar or equal products to the ones that you'd identified in the spec?
No, I under the contract, the request to change a product can't be unreasonably withheld. Oh, sorry, agreement to change a product can't be unreasonably withheld if it's equal, whereas a contractor has freedom to propose anything, as I understand it. And if the client agrees, that's
Yes,
agreed.
I follow that. So, I mean, if Ryden suggested something completely different and provided the client was signed up to it, I can see that might have been a change. But I think you just agreed with me that in terms of what this NBS specification is envisaging, it's similar or equal to the products that you've identified. Do you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Can we now turn to some statements that Ryden have made? So if we can go to RYD 000-94236. This is a witness statement provided to the inquiry on behalf of Ryden the company. Can we look at page 37? Sorry. RYD 000-94236. So this is the witness statement on behalf of Ryden Maintenance Limited. And if we can go within that to page 37. And what I'd like you to read, you see at the bottom of that page, may need to zoom in. I'd like you to read under the heading, the NBS specification stroke employer's requirements were detailed and prescriptive. I'd like you to read paragraph 75 and then over into 76. Can you just read those to yourself? We'll have to scroll the page over.
Okay. Sorry, have I missed it? 75. So that's bottom of the page, and top of the page is that. Okay.
Yeah, and then can you read 76 as well?
Okay.
So I want to ask you about the statements that are made there. Do you agree that the NBS specification was unusual in that it was more detailed and prescriptive than would normally be expected?
Not for us, no.
Not in your experience?
No.
Do you agree that the NBS specification can be described as highly prescriptive?
I didn't think it was unusually prescriptive, or therefore not highly prescriptive, no.
So if you go on and look at paragraph 77 on that same page, Ryden there say, this meant that the design concept, including the choice and combination of materials, was in practical terms established by the time of the tender process, with the detailed design to be developed. As is set out below, tenderers had to provide a tender which would comply strictly with the NBS specification employer's requirements, which Ryden Maintenance Limited confirmed that it had done. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Do you agree that in practical terms, Studio E had established the design concept by the time of the tender?
Well, they've said including choice and combination of materials.
Yes.
I would use concept as a more loose term.
Do you agree?
But I agree that the materials were selected, yes.
Can we now go to pages 49 to 50 within this Ryden statement and look at paragraph 99? So if you can read that to yourself. So read 99.
Okay. Okay.
Do you agree there with the statement by Ryden that the specified products and systems would have had to have been considered for planning approval and compliance with, amongst other things, the building regulations by the design team?
Yes.
Now, I think you accepted earlier that Studio E itself hadn't done a compliance check of the materials. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Why is there no red flag or clear caveat within the NBS specification, making clear that the products and the design specified therein had not been checked for compliance with the building regulations?
Well, if we had reason to put a flag in, I think there'd be reason not to specify them. We had no knowledge of any concerns.
I see. So are you saying that the reason you didn't put a red flag or clear caveat?
I think a red flag is almost worse. We didn't know there was any concerns regarding their compliance.
So you assumed they were compliant when you put them in the NBS spec?
I think my statement goes into some detail as to why we believe them to be compliant.
Yes, and we'll look at that when it comes to particular products, but I'm just looking at the general proposition here. You hadn't yourselves checked for compliance, had you? I think
we had referred it, but I don't, well, had we referred it? We had asked for advice, but it wasn't for us to, as it were, satisfy ourselves on the reading of the regulations that it was compliant, because I don't think that was within our ability.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I think that
Would that be a good
concludes
point?
this line for the moment.
Yep. We're going to have a short break now, Mr. Sounes. So would you like to go with the usher, and we'll resume at 3:30. Thank you. At 3:30, please. Thank you. Yes, could we have Mr. Sounes back, please? Thank you. Nice glass of cold water if you're feeling too warm. Right?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Strange.
Thank you, yes. So I'm now going to turn to a different topic and ask you some questions about Studio E's involvement with Exova on the project. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And is it right that Exova was the specialist fire consultant involved with the Calc project and was subcontracted by Studio E itself on that project?
Yes.
What I want to do first up is to bring up some minutes from a client meeting on the 28th of March 2012. This is at MAX 708. And so we see that this is a notes of a meeting, Grenfell Tower refurbishment, minutes of a client meeting. And if we can go on page 2 under item 4.0, headed additional consultants, Studio E are said to have noted, this is in the second to last item there. Can you see it says there, fire safety advice may be required?
Yes.
And then Studio E.
Yes.
And was that your suggestion that fire safety advice may be required?
Yes.
What was in your mind at that stage when you said fire safety advice may be required? Which aspects of the project were calling out, in your view, for fire safety advice?
I think fire safety is fire safety. At that point, I wasn't. I don't think I was restricting it, although I was obviously thinking of our initial phases of looking at the changes. So it just was clear on reflection after the meeting that the consultants would need to include a fire consultant. That's, I think, as far as I went. I may have discussed it with somebody, but I thought it was worth putting this minute in to be sure to pick it up later.
Yeah. Can we then go to SEA 403957? If we can blow that up. So this appears to be, from what we can tell, Studio E's first contact with Exova in respect of the Grenfell Tower project. It's dated the 10th of April 2012, and we can see Mr. Kiefer of Studio E emails Mr. Lee and Mr. Ashton with a number of drawings and asking for, you see it 3 paragraphs down, he said, we'd like to ask you to provide us with your initial assessment regarding fire escape strategies for the above layout proposals. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you are CC'd onto this email. I think we can see that at the top. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did your colleagues at Studio E contact Exova regarding the provision of this advice at your behest?
I can't recall what happened. I think I would have made the initial contact, but I do not recall.
So thereafter, Exova attend the first design team meeting on the 19th of April 2012. For your notes, for the transcript, the minutes of that are at TMO 1001143. We don't need to go to those. But then what happens is you contact Mr. Ashton of Exova on the 24th of April 2012. Can we bring that email up? That's at SEA 404053. And can you just take a second to just familiarise yourself with that email?
Yeah.
It's you to Terry Ashton on the 24th of April.
Yes.
Are you familiar?
I am.
You're familiar with
I have
that?
read this recently, yes.
Thank you. And you say in the second paragraph there, we have thus far had no commitment in writing from you to a fire strategy on either the Calc Leisure Centre academy, residential development, or the Grenfell Tower upgrade. We have had no concrete input by way of drawing markups or draft reports to support the developing designs. This is becoming critical for us with 3 weeks to go before we submit the Stage D report for calc, with much of the work undertaken so far by the whole team relying on the fire safety advice we've received at meetings. We fear that the designs have not had adequate scrutiny and that we are at considerable risk at this late stage of late changes, abortive work, and possible cost implications to the project. Do you see that paragraph there?
Yes.
And then I'll ask you some questions in a moment, but in the third paragraph you state, if you are unable to reassure us that you are committed to the 2 projects by the end of this week, both agreeing contract terms and providing detailed advice, we will regard this as a renunciation of the Commission and be forced to look elsewhere for fire safety advice. Do you see that?
Yes.
So do we take it from that email that Exover's performance on the calc project was of concern to you at this stage?
I wasn't involved on the calc project, and I must have been relating others' concerns. But I think my recollection is that the agreement was a cause for concern, and that's I think what lay behind this email.
I mean, we see it's about the Calc Leisure Centre project in particular, but they also talk about the Grenfell Tower upgrade. Were you concerned about their lack of input?
I didn't mention it, and I think the timing doesn't suggest I would have been. But as per the subject, rather the attachments, the appointment, I think, was our primary concern at that point, as I recall.
Yeah.
I appreciate it does refer to calc, but I was not as closely involved on calc.
Was it your view that Exover had not provided adequate scrutiny of Studio E's designs?
No, that wasn't my view. That was expressing a concern held by the team on calc.
So was it the Studio E view on the calc project that they hadn't provided adequate scrutiny of Studio E's designs?
It was a concern that they hadn't provided adequate scrutiny.
And was there a concern that oral advice in meetings had been given, but with little or anything provided on paper?
That was the concern, yes. We want to, I assume it had all been verbal, or at least we wanted something more concrete.
In short, is it right that there had been no concrete input from Exover on the calc project at that stage?
I can't say. I was not. I'm sorry, on calc.
Yes.
I'm not sure. I wasn't involved.
So is your position that all you're doing here is relaying concerns by your colleagues?
I recall that the 2 agreements were becoming critical, and I was tasked to follow it up with Exover. I may have been involved in preparing the sub-consultant agreement as well.
Do you know why Exover were failing to give the scrutiny and the advice on the calc projects that your colleagues were requiring?
No, I don't know why.
Did you ever have any discussions with Mr. Ashton or anyone else at Exover regarding resourcing issues at this time?
I may have done, but I don't recall.
Again,
sorry. Usually you would, before you send an email like that, you would speak to someone. So I assume I did speak to someone.
Do you have a recollection of
I
speaking to
don't.
anyone? Against the background of this dissatisfaction with Exover's work on the calc project, can you explain why you sought to obtain their input as the specialist fire consultant on the Grenfell project?
We understood Exover to be a competent and large and experienced consultant on fire advice, and we would rather have maintained continuity with them on both sites.
I see. Did Exover do anything specific to allay the concerns such that you were content to continue with their appointment on the Grenfell Tower project?
I can't recall the exact sequence of what followed, but I believe that they did satisfy us.
Okay. And you said earlier that somebody gave you, from the Calc team, gave you information about Exover's performance that you were relaying. Can you remember who that was?
I can't remember who that was. It would like the team, as we've discussed, was led by Andre and Neil. So
Could it have been Mr. Crawford that
quite
relayed
possibly,
those concerns?
Quite possibly.
Yeah. Can we now turn to EXO 50474? This is your email to Mr. Ashton, dated the 3rd of May 2012. If we can blow that up a little, great. So this is your email to him requesting a fee proposal. We can see that in your email. The application for the funding goes before the Cabinet this evening with every likelihood that the 6 million asphalt will be agreed. And then in the next paragraph, you say, I anticipate Mark Anderson from the TMO, our client, to quickly follow up with confirmation as to the scope of the project, but the principles are probably going to be based on the attached sketch. And then you've set out in numbered paragraphs what the refurbishment would comprise. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And these included, we've got new flats, item 1, on the vacant office level. And then we can see overcladding, can't we, at paragraph 4.
Yeah.
And then 5, we've got new boilers to all flats, and 6, reconfigured entrance circulation area to the tower.
Yeah.
So is it right that from this early stage you knew that Exover's advice in respect of the overcladding would be required?
I was merely giving him an overview of the project.
So you hadn't? Are you saying you hadn't thought at this stage whether each of these elements would be something that Exover would need to deal with?
In a general sense, yes, but not in a specific sense. If that's clear. I was giving him a description of the project so he understood the scope.
You say at the end there, can you see underneath bullet point 6 that you say, please could I have your fee proposal for this based on the above and the attached information? Do you see that?
Yes.
Please break this down into stages C, D, E, F and beyond. Yes?
Yes.
So is it right that the scope of Exover's work that you wanted them to quote for would be in relation to each of these 6 items?
I think we would want them to cover anything and everything. I wouldn't approach someone with a limited scope on a...
Yes, so you wanted their fee proposal to include item 4 overcladding. Is that correct?
If required, yes. Yes.
What does that mean, if required?
It means that I would... It wasn't a shopping list. I was describing the project.
Okay. Can we turn now to Exover's fee proposal itself that they came back with? This is at TMO 100038885. And we can see from this, it's Exover Warrington Fire there on the right-hand side to you, Mr. B. Sounes, dated, and this is dated the 9th of May 2012. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And then on page 1, at the bottom of page 1, we see they've set out their company profile. Do you see that?
Yes.
So they're talking about the they've been working in the field of fire strategy since 1965, etc. And they've given you indications of awards that they've won. Can we then go to the proposed scope of work on page 2? If we could look at the top of that page. So we can see there that they're saying the planned fire safety work will be undertaken using the relevant design codes and will facilitate the progression of the design from REBA stage C to F. When they say using the relevant design codes, what do you understand them to mean by that?
I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I assume they mean approved documents and anything else that may be applicable.
Yeah. And then in the second paragraph of that, it states the aim of the fire safety work would be to ensure a high standard of fire and life safety for the occupants of the building, whilst highlighting any areas of the building's design that may present an approvals risk. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then can we look at what's said about REBA stage C further down on this page? And if we look at those bullets under stage C, we can see that it will provide, we see in the second sentence at the top of REBA stage C, this work will provide a level of confidence with regards to the fire safety design and fire safety approvals risk. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then they say immediately after, the work would focus on issues that would either have an effect on a future application under the Building Regulations 2010 or would have a significant cost impact. Do you see that?
Yes.
And it would include, they say, a preliminary fire strategy report would be produced. That's in the second paragraph.
Yeah.
Do you see that there? Which would summarise the main fire safety issues for the project.
Yes.
Do you see that? And they also say that their work at this stage would involve attending relevant design team meetings in the first bullet. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And we also see providing, in that same bullet, providing appropriate fire safety guidance to other members of the design team to assist the proposed development. You see that?
Yeah.
And they say it would include the creation of an outline fire strategy document. This is the third bullet, to assist in early design development.
Yeah.
And also, last bullet, provision of an updated revision of the outline fire safety strategy report to reflect any agreed changes to the strategy during early design development. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, as we've looked before, REBA stage C is the stage for concept design. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you ever consider whether at stage C, Exova would be identifying the relevant statutory controls and requirements for you? Did you take that to be implicit in what they would be doing?
Yes.
Was it of any concern to you that that was not expressly identified as part of this fee proposal?
No.
Why not?
They've said that the work would review all relevant codes, and given their experience, I assume that would cover what you're asking.
I see, yeah. The reference that we looked at in the first paragraph, in the third sentence of the first paragraph, to focusing on issues that would either have an effect on a future application under the building regulations or would have a significant cost impact. Did this suggest to you when you were reading it a focus on commercial aspects?
I don't think I read it that closely at the time, no.
Can you explain why there's no reference to the CDM regulations in this fee proposal letter?
No.
Did you ever query that with Exova?
Obviously, fire is very much a safety issue, but I wouldn't normally associate them.
Did you recognise that Exova would be preparing or modifying designs based on their work on the fire strategy in a way which would make them designers under the CDM regulations?
No.
Can we look then at what's said at Rebus stage D and E, at the second half of that page? Yes. So it's stated there that the work at stages D and E would involve, in the first paragraph, they say the work undertaken by Exova during stage C would be further developed during the approval stage of the project. And then they say the work would ultimately involve the creation of a detailed fire strategy for the proposed development, which will be written in line with the requirements of the building regulations. Do you see that in the first paragraph?
Yeah.
And they also say in the next sentence, the fire safety design will be documented in a fire strategy report. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then in the third paragraph, the fire safety strategy would be developed to comply with the relevant statutory requirements, which would primarily be the Building Regs 2010, the RRO, the Regulatory Reform Order 2005, and the London Building Acts 1939. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And they've also said that this fire safety strategy will consider the following items. Can you look at the fourth bullet point there? It says determination of any external fire spread issues that there may be and the impact this may have on the architectural design. Do you see that?
Yes.
And in the fifth bullet, it also says recommendations of compartmentation and structural fire protection standards. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then if we go to the top of page 3, they say Exova would attend, in the first bullet, attend relevant design team meetings. That's under the scope of work for this stage, would include attending relevant design team meetings and provide the appropriate fire safety guidance to other members of the design team to assist the proposed development. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Now, it's right, isn't it, that Rebus stage D is the design development stage and stage E is the technical design stage.
Yes.
So as we can see from the first paragraph under that heading, if we go back one page, it's talking about in that first paragraph, a detailed fire strategy for the proposed refurbishment. Do you see that? Did you have any view at that stage as to what a detailed fire strategy would include?
We've obviously worked with fire consultants before, so we knew it would be a document, a number of pages discussing the requirements.
Did you form a view as to how this detailed fire strategy would be different from the preliminary fire strategy report at stage C?
I expected it to be an update and to reflect the increased detail on the drawings and the greater clarity on the design, because at stage C there often isn't much clarity on the layouts. So I would expect it to be more detailed, more definitive by stage D.
Yeah. And it's right, isn't it, that a detailed fire strategy at the end of stage E was required to provide sufficient information to enable the preparation of technical designs and specifications for tenderers?
Yes.
Now, there's no provision in this stage DE bit of the proposal for reviewing the design documentation, is there?
No.
Do you agree that review by a competent fire safety engineer enhances the chances that the building design will meet the functional requirements of the building regulations?
Yes.
And would you agree that the reverse is the case, i.e. if there's no review of the design documentation by a competent fire engineer, it increases the chances that the design won't meet the functional requirements of the building regulations?
Yes.
Would you agree that this was a serious omission on Exover's part in putting together this fee proposal?
I think it's mentioned determination of any external fire spread issues. As to whether that should be spelt out as a detailed review of documentation, I'm not sure. I would have.
Did this give you any cause for concern at the time that a review of the detailed design was not, of the design documentation was not provided for at this stage?
In respect of the envelope?
In respect of
No.
any part of the project, did you have any concerns about the scope of work at this stage that was being proposed?
No.
And it's also stated on page 2, the second paragraph under stage D and E, that the fire safety design would be documented in a fire strategy report, and this document would ultimately be submitted to the Building Control Authority in order to receive regulatory approval. So do you agree that it was clearly envisaged that the document that Exover produced at stage D/E would be submitted to Building Control to get their approval on the project?
Yes, I do. I agree.
And then if we can move on to the proposal for REBA stage F on page 3. So this is the stage for production information to enable tenders to be obtained. And if we look at stage F, we can see that they've said on the first bullet on page 3 that, again, they'll attend relevant fire safety meetings with the design team and the appointed contractor to clarify the fire safety strategies used throughout the development. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then in the second bullet, they've put troubleshooting strategic fire safety issues that are identified by the contractors. Do you see that?
Yes.
What sort of assistance did you envisage Exover would provide to the design team and the appointed contractor at this stage?
At the stage of stage F, or at the stage of stage C when this was received?
What input did you envisage Exover would be having at stage F based on this fee proposal?
I expected it would be the query and available for consultation to answer any questions.
As and when required?
Yeah, by the team.
Was the fee proposal in line with your previous experience of using fire safety engineers?
I'm not sure. I didn't compare.
What previous experience did you have of working with fire safety engineers on projects? I think all the large schools that we were involved in, some of which I was not full-time or involved in significant detail, but they would have all had fire consultants. So the ones I'm thinking of are, if I can name them, but going back to the beginning of my time at Studio E, the Bermondsey Academy, Yeah.
the Arc Academy, Skinner's Academy, these all had fire strategies, fire safety strategies.
And was that involving Exover as well? Or other fire consultants?
Bermondsey may have involved Exover, I'm not sure.
Okay. Now, if we can turn up now, SEA 404242. At the very bottom of this first page is the email from Margaret Trenner, I think is an administrative member of the admin staff in Exover, to you with the fee proposal. If you go over onto the top, you say, please find attached Terry Ashton's fee proposal for the provision of fire engineering consultancy services on the above project. Do you see that?
Yes.
It's sent by email only. Hope it meets your requirements. And if we move up back onto page 1, at the top of page 1, we can see your response on the 21st of May. This is 11 days later at 9:53. You say, thank you for your fee proposal. As per Mark's email of the 4th of May, the Grenfell project is proceeding and we need your stage C input to establish the feasibility of the proposals attached. We have a meeting tomorrow, which is short notice, but it would be useful for one of you to be there to provide some feedback. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Did you ever provide Exover with any substantive response to the fee proposal? Any comments on the fee proposal? Any?
I can't recall doing so. I don't think there's any record.
Did you yourself undertake any kind of analysis of the fee proposal about what it included, what it might not have included, whether that was going to be sufficient for the requirements on the project?
I obviously don't have a record of reviewing it. I know I passed it straight on to the client, but I believe I would have looked at it,
Yeah.
at least to be sure that it covered what I was more or less in line with what I was expecting. I
Yeah.
certainly wouldn't have scrutinised it as you are right now.
Did you think it was someone else's job to comment on the fee proposal? You say you forwarded it to the client. Did you think that somebody else ought to comment on it?
No, I think the client would be the client. We wouldn't be appointing Exover as a subconsultant. So I was passing it on to the client.
We can see that you forwarded the fee proposal to Artelia at Appleyards. You did that on the 11th of June. Can we just quickly look at that? That's SEA 404542. And we can see there, Alan, and we see in the second paragraph, I'm attaching the information we received from Exover, the fire specialist. I've not yet told them that they'll be working direct to the TMO. Do you see that?
Yeah.
So that's the fee proposal. So that goes on the 11th of June. That's over a month after the fee proposal's been received on the 9th of May. Do you remember why there might have been a delay?
No.
And can you explain why it was that Studio E, that you sought and received the fee proposal rather than Artelia as employer's agent and CDM coordinator?
I think I had agreed to do it or had been asked to do it on behalf, because we had suggested Exover, who we were working with on Calc.
Who asked you to do it? Do you recall?
I don't recall, but it would have been the client, I think.
Yeah. Can we now look at SEA 404708? This is an email from Mr. Dawson of Appleyards, then Artelia, to you, dated the 18th of June 2012, in response to you forwarding Exover's fee proposal. And we can see in that short email that he queries, he says, is there a particular urgency to get this one formalised? Do you see that?
Yeah.
Can you recall whether you responded to that email?
I obviously can't recall in detail so long ago, but I would assume that I would have, perhaps by call rather than by email.
If you had responded, wouldn't the answer have been emphatically yes, given that there was no fire strategy for the refurbishment project at that time?
Yeah, yes, but I cannot remember the exact circumstances of this conversation, but I do not recall them being held up by the agreement.
If we can we just look at your witness statement for a moment? That's SEA 3014273 at page 37. And you say at paragraph 78, and if we go into page 38, at the very end of that paragraph, you're dealing with Exova. 5 lines up, there's a sentence beginning, you say, I understand, because I was copied into an email, that 6 months later, Exova was still not sure whether this fee proposal had been accepted by KCTMO, although they had been working on the project since May 2012, and James Lee, Exova, may have visited site on the 29th of May 2012. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can we turn, in the context of that, to SEA 6074? And look at the second email in the chain, down at the bottom of page 1. So this is an email from Alan Dawson back to you on the 18th of July 2012. And he says in the first paragraph, I just wanted to drop you a short note to confirm that the client has now confirmed your proposed fee is approved, to which end we would now ask that you engage with Bruce at Studio E in respect of the above project forthwith. Do you see that? Sorry, it's an email from Alan Dawson to Terry Ashton copying you in. Do you see that?
Yes.
So Mr. Dawson is telling Mr. Ashton that the fees are approved. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you accept that in practice, Studio E had taken on the responsibility of liaising with Exova and procuring the fire strategy?
Sorry, taken on? Can you repeat
Yes,
that?
by seeking a fee proposal from them, that you'd effectively taken on responsibility of liaising with Exova and procuring the fire strategy. Do you accept that the day-to-day liaison about it was with you, Studio E?
Given that we weren't appointing Exova directly, I think that the way you've expressed it takes it a bit far, but I do agree that we were the ones liaising as lead designer most directly with Exova.
Yeah, okay, that's fair, yeah. Did you understand that the TMO and the rest of the design team were relying on Studio E to ensure that the scope of Exova's work was undertaken?
Yes, I think, well, I think all consultants would be expected to comment on any deficiencies that they perceived or could see. So certainly, as I mentioned, Studio E as lead designer were most regularly in contact with Exova.
Okay, yep. Can we go back to SEA 404242 and your email to Mr. Ashton of the 21st of May 2012? And we can see there in the first paragraph that you asked Mr. Ashton for stage C input. Do you see that?
Yes.
To establish the feasibility of the proposals. Can you just be clear what you meant by stage C input? To establish the feasibility of the proposals?
I can't recall if this was before or after they sent their quote. I think it's before.
I think it's after.
Is it after?
Their quote was the 9th of May 2012.
So I guess I'm chasing Terry for the first input from them on the drawings.
Yes. Were you anticipating referring to or using Exova's stage C input in your own stage C report?
I think my expectation in preparing a report is that you reach a point with the consultants where you have a design, a proposal that you think reaches stage C, and each consultant prepares his information on that basis. In the case of fire, I would expect there to be a much closer integration between the stage C input and the architectural input, the architectural drawings, if that makes sense. So when you say stage C input, I would expect the stage C input in terms of fire to be integrated.
And does that mean integrated in your own stage C report that you would produce?
Into the report, but also, as it were, integrated into the design.
Into the design work at stage C?
Yes. Which I wouldn't necessarily expect of other consultants.
Yes. Can we look at Mr. Ashton's response to this request for stage C input? If we turn to SEA 6020. So this is Mr. Ashton's response the following day on the 22nd of May. Can you just read that? Are you familiar with this? Have you looked at it recently?
No.
Have a read of this. So Terry Ashton is providing you with his initial comments on your proposals. You see that? Sorry, have a read.
It's quite difficult to interpret what he's discussing there.
Yes, well, let's see what you say about it, because that's consistent with what you said contemporaneously. If we now look at EXO 50685, and I want to look at the second email on that page at the bottom, second half of that page. You reply to Mr. Ashton on the 22nd of May, and you say, "Thank you, but I don't follow. I obviously know the building quite well now. The attached pictures might help." And then you say, "Mark Anderson would like to hold a design team meeting for Thursday. I do not think it's essential you're there, but I think it's important we get a more detailed appraisal of any issues." Do you see that?
Yeah.
And then you say a site visit is probably essential.
Yeah.
So it's clear, isn't it, I think, from your response that you're not really following the advice he's given. Can you explain why? What was in your mind?
What was in my mind?
If you can remember.
I think if you put the drawings that I had sent him and his comments side by side, you could possibly go through each point, but it is quite tricky or difficult to follow.
Yeah. When you asked for stage C input, is that the kind of thing you had expected to receive from Exover?
No, I would expect more than that. That was just obviously his relatively off-the-cuff input.
Yeah. And is that why you've said in this email, I think it's important we get a more detailed appraisal of any issues? Do you see that?
Yes.
And then if we can move to the top of the chain, at page 1, we see a response from Mr. Ashton, and he says, "Bruce, I can't look at the building this week due to other commitments, and I'm afraid that, on their own, the photos don't help. It would be better to visit the building before giving you the necessary advice." Do you see that?
Yeah.
Do you know whether Mr. Ashton ever did undertake a site visit to Grenfell Tower at any stage of the project?
I don't know.
You don't know, or you don't recall him making a site visit?
I correct myself. I think he did. but I'd have to check. I think there was a meeting which I didn't attend on site with Ledbetter Bouygues. I think he and Adrian attended,
Right.
so that is effectively site.
Yeah. Was that in November 2012, kind of to discuss building control issues? We may come to that later.
It could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We know that Mr. Lee of Exover, James Lee of Exover, undertook a site visit on the 29th of May 2012. And then we know that on the 30th of May 2012, Exover provided some marked up drawings of the plans that you'd sent previously. Can we just look at these? These are SEA 404324. Now, we don't need to spend too long on these, but if we just go through them, there's 4 pages. If we just flick through them, what I want you to confirm is that there's no commentary provided here in respect of the proposal to overclad the building, is there?
No.
Now, given your concerns about Exover's performance in respect of the Calc project and the concerns you'd raised with them about their commitment on the 24th of April, why did you not insist on more detailed advice at this stage?
This was a very early stage. This wasn't short of what I might have expected.
So you weren't concerned about the level of input you were getting from Exover at this stage?
No, no.
So then moving forward, there's a design team meeting on the 25th of June. And at that time, I think just for the transcript, it's SEA 404864. It was noted that there was no existing fire strategy for the current building and that Exover would need to prepare one as part of the upgrade works. And it said Studio E were to chase Exover. Do you recall that happening?
I think I do, yeah.
Yeah. If we can turn to SEA 404860, we can see in an email from you to James Lee. Let's just bring that up, sorry. SEA 404860. This is an email from you to James Lee dated the 3rd of July that you chase Exover for the existing fire safety strategy at this point. Do you see that?
Yes.
Are you any closer to preparing a fire strategy for Grenfell Tower as existing? Proposal attached. And you'd had a separate proposal, hadn't you, in relation to a fire strategy for the existing building?
Yes.
But there's no additional demand in this email for progress in relation to the fire strategy for the refurbishment. Why did you not ask for an update on that, given there had been no progress on that by this stage?
I'm afraid I can't remember the circumstances.
Okay. Can we turn to SEA 405254? These are the minutes of the project meeting on the 18th of July 2012. And if you look at the final item on page 4, under previous actions, can you see there? There's a roundup of previous actions. And it states at the end, there is no existing fire strategy for the building, Exover to proceed. Do you see that?
Yes.
So that action hadn't changed from the previous meeting. Do you accept, given the criticality of the fire strategy to the design of the refurbishment, that higher priority should have been given to that at this stage? So this is July 2012.
We have given it high priority. I mean, it's not just it's not the bottom of the list out of any sequence of.
But that's about
priority.
the existing fire strategy for the building.
Yeah.
What about the refurbishment fire strategy?
I think the one needed to follow the other. Maybe I don't recall why. I think we were expecting the one to follow the other.
Okay, we can see that the day before this meeting, if we go to SEA 6035,
So to follow what I mean, I think that they needed to do the existing before they could
I see.
follow through with.
So it needed to follow that sequence?
Yes, there needed to be a sequence.
Understood. We see, if we go SEA 6035, this is an email from Mr. James Lee to you, dated the 17th of July 2012. And he makes it clear in this email that he's informing you that I shall be leaving Exover at the end of this week. After my departure, you'll be left in the capable hands of Terry Ashton, CC'd into this email, who will take responsibility for my project. Do you see that?
Yes.
So given it had been Mr. Lee who had visited the site on the 29th of May, and I think you understood, did you understand him to have been the one doing the refurbishment strategy prior to this?
Yes, he had been the one to forward those earlier comments.
Did you consider that this, i.e. Mr. Lee's departure, might have been the reason for the lack of progress by Exover at this point?
No, I didn't.
Did you take any steps at this stage to bring Mr. Ashton up to speed with the project?
I can't obviously recall phone calls. If it's not in an email, I haven't got any evidence. But I know we did. Well, I followed up with Exover and hereafter.
Did you take any steps to satisfy yourself that the handover between Mr. Lee and Mr. Ashton had been adequate?
Well, I knew Terry had been our first point of contact. I wasn't clear on the hierarchy between them, but I didn't take any steps to query the handover, no.
Okay. Can we go forward a little bit forward in time to SEA 405606? These are minutes from a design team meeting of the 26th of July 2012. And if we look in the list of people present, we can see 3 people up, that Claire Barker of Exover is present. Do you see that?
Yes.
And if we go to page 2 of these meeting minutes, under architecture, at the end of the second paragraph, do you see it says there, proposal to clad over the columns at ground with in situ high quality concrete finish. Do you see that? It's the second
yes,
sentence
yes.
after window samples.
Yes.
And then if you go over onto page 3, under services, do you see there in the third item down, it says coordination of cladding, heating and seasons critical. Input required from Leadbetter. Do you see that?
Yes.
And then under contractor in page 3, at the bottom there, we can see in the first paragraph it says Leadbetter have considered option of being able to complete overcladding before an independent removal of existing windows. Do you see that?
Yes.
So do you agree that clearly the proposal to overclad the building was made plain at this meeting, which Miss Barker attended?
Yes. I think that the proposal to overclad the building was plain to everyone.
Yeah.
Throughout.
Yeah. And then at page 4, final point under quantity surveyor, we see again the reference, there's no existing fire strategy for the building Exover to proceed. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, can we just pick up your witness statement at this point? SEA 30-14273 at page 51. And can we look at paragraph 108 in the middle of that page? And you say there, after the meeting on the 30th of July 2012, I emailed Claire Barker of Exover and thanked her for attending the meeting. I said that I didn't expect to need another meeting with Exova before submitting to planning, and then possibly not again until we entered negotiations with building control. This email was prompted by my having pressed for Exova to attend. My recollection is that Claire was covering for others and had to travel some distance and had little to contribute for much of the meeting. Despite this, I felt it was important Exova were represented, given the importance of fire safety. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can you just explain why you didn't think that you needed another meeting with Exova before submitting to planning, given that the design had not been finalised and Exova hadn't produced anything in respect of the fire safety strategy for the refurbishment?
Sorry, why we wouldn't need another meeting?
Yeah.
I expected, provided they had understood the site and existing condition, that it would be possible to do that over the phone or through correspondence by email.
I see. So it was a face-to-face meeting you didn't think was necessary.
Yes.
I see.
Yes.
Can we then turn to SEA 405595 at page 2? And I want to look at the second email down on page 2. So on the 30th of July, Claire Barker... Sorry, I think it's the... It's the email one up from this. Apologies. So this is Miss Barker responding to you, 1629, yes, on the 30th of July. And I just want to focus on what she says in the third and the fourth paragraphs. So she says, in terms of allocating resources to this project, I'm happy to work on the fire strategy for the existing Grenfell Tower from the Warrington office and will aim to get the report to you before the deadline of the 16th of August. Then she says, July and August are fairly quiet months for the fire engineering division as it's holiday time for a lot of people. However, this year it seems to have gone a bit mad and we have had a number of large projects come in at once. As I mentioned at the meeting, my colleague Terry Ashton will be back at work on the 6th of August, so it may be better if he continued with the project during the rebus CE stages, as I am on annual leave for the last 2 weeks in August. Do you see that?
Yes.
Just picking up on what we read first in that third paragraph, did it concern you that Exova were planning to work on the existing fire strategy from the Warrington office and not their London offices?
No.
Can you explain why that wasn't concerning?
I didn't think a face-to-face contact was necessary, and I didn't think they needed to visit site frequently, so I couldn't see why it couldn't be done elsewhere. It didn't have to be London.
When you say they didn't need to visit site frequently,
Yeah.
is that because, in your view, the work of a fire engineer can be done without frequent visits to site?
I would expect so. Yeah, they don't. It's not that type of assessment.
Okay. And then we've seen in the fourth paragraph, she's explained that July and August have, in her words, gone a bit mad, and it may be better if Mr. Ashton continues. Were you concerned at this point that Exova might have been having resourcing difficulties in terms of delivering what you were expecting from them?
This is the email, or the one below, is the email that's referred to in the previous extract from my witness statement.
Yes.
And I say I do recall pressing for attendance, and I spoke to a few people. It may have been at this point, but I think at some point Terry was off ill, but I can't remember if this was now or earlier.
Yeah. Let's go to the top of the chain on page 1. Mr. Chairman, if I can just finish this line of questioning, it really won't take long. And then
Another 2 minutes?
2 minutes.
Okay.
So there, you respond to Ms. Barker on the 7th of August 2012. And then you
Yeah.
say, apologies for not responding sooner. I've been distracted, but I couldn't understand where you got the 16th of August deadline. This is the planning deadline. Any impact the fire strategy has on the overall scheme needs to be understood sooner than this. Ideal, we should be submitting a stage C type document to the client for the end of this week or next week. And then you say it will be enough to know that you've reviewed the scheme and have no significant comments, reservations to make, and the strategy for fire safety is achievable. And then read this, and any implications on the layout and external works is understood by the rest of the design team. Do you see that?
Yeah.
So is it right that at this point you're being clear with Exover that you're looking to understand any implications of the external works on the fire safety strategy?
Yes, but external works is usually a term applied to landscape.
The landscaping,
Yeah.
I see.
Usually external works applies to landscaping.
Would what you have said there, any implications on the layout and external works is understood by the rest of the design team, would that include the overcladding?
If it were to have any implications, yes. I think that's the purpose of a fire strategy, to alert us to any concerns. I mean, my clarification of the external works, that I'm not sure Claire would follow that's a term that perhaps a contractor is more familiar with than a fire consultant. But external works usually is landscaping.
I see, yeah. Okay. We can pause there.
That's a
Pick this up
convenient point.
tomorrow. It is a convenient point. Thank you.
Yes, all right, thank you. Well, you've got a few more questions, I take it, for this witness.
I have, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's all right.
But we're making decent progress.
Good. Well, Mr. Sounes, we're going to call a halt there for today. It's been a long enough day, I'm sure, for you and for everyone else too. So, but I am going to have to ask you to come back for some more questions tomorrow. Sorry about that, but a lot of ground to cover.
Yep.
All right, so over the adjournment, please remember not to discuss your evidence or really anything to do with it with anyone else. And we'll resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow, please. All right? If you'd like to go with the usher, she'll look after you. Right, 10 o'clock tomorrow, please. Thank you.